My brother and I are trying to sit and work our way through this weird spacefaring adventure Outer Wilds. It takes the concept of game design and expands it out into an actual, fully realized, physically based galaxy. You're actually going to real planets with real rules at the core running behind the scenes of what they are. And you get to understand those rules in order to progress in a kind of knowledge. We have some strong opinions about some of the design elements, some of the ways in which you can interpret different facets of the game. And we're going to break down what we think this game is about, what sort of ideas it touches on, ideas in physics, ideas in philosophy, ideas about time and space, but also where it fits in this realm of puzzle games or discovery translation games, where it's as much about discovering the meaning of the world that you're in as it is about solving problems. This project started as a master's thesis for the lead developer behind the game. The impetus for this thesis was trying to play with a non-static world in a game space, a dynamically systems-based world. The goal of the game that the developer said that he had was that the curiosity for information would become your motivator to go out into space. The game opens and you're just on this single planet. It's called Timber Hearth. And it kind of looks like planet Earth. It has lots of greenery and trees. It's fairly familiar. As you're exploring this village and you're going down and you're talking to various people, the game is building up gaps in your knowledge. They'll mention like key information about some of the other places that you might go. There's a little museum that you can visit which has some implication that there is this former ancestor species that once existed that we seem to find artifacts from throughout the star system. So it's just planting the seed of there's information out there, but then it's just up to you whether you want to partake in that. And that really seems to be the overarching impetus for everything that you're doing, is just discovering things. You and I reviewed The Witness. I reviewed the game Tunic for the channel. Both of those games, to me, carry this ethos of the secret is the mechanic. The whole point of doing the entirety of the journey is just to develop yourself as a player in relation to information and to value information for its own sake. You have to voluntarily decide, I care about understanding the place that I'm in. I care about actually going a step beyond what's necessary. And the truth that I gain from that may not have any practical purpose other than the process of learning. There's that beautiful kind of scientific impulse at the bottom of that, the same impulse that exists for any endeavor to discover things about our world. These games kind of suck you into that yearning for eureka moment of seeing the ways in which everything kind of comes together causally. In some ways, this puzzle game is not like any other puzzle game that's ever existed, in the sense that as opposed to operating on discrete, separate, boxed concepts, where it's like you're given a puzzle and you know all the parameters of the puzzle and they're very limited in terms of how many elements interact with one another. This one, as opposed to discreteness, seems to fall back onto contingency above all else. Every piece of every puzzle is connected to all others. There is a real physics tying them all together. Because you're a spacefarer trying to explore this star system with various planets orbiting around the sun, and at any time that you're on any one planet, all the planets continue orbiting. The logic of that orbit creates a kind of constraint that applies across the board. And so there are things that you will learn on one planet, or things that you will learn perhaps by mistake in the midst of flying around between these spaces, that apply to almost all the places throughout the whole star system. The feeling is of one grand puzzle.
In the moment, you do have to pay a lot of attention. You do have to remember how the world works. You have to use ever-present physical principles of the world to interact in such a way that you can access new areas and pay attention to those. You are unlocking things according to your knowledge base. It would be unfair to Outer Wilds to expect it to offer a lot of concrete and discrete puzzles. In order for a game to have a lot of discrete puzzles, it has to feel like somebody designed the puzzles, and that's really not what the game is about. The game is about nature. It's about the wilderness. You're discovering the world, but you're only discovering it at the pace necessary to solve the central puzzle. It's not about going through stages. It's a more organic experience in a lot of ways. The physics are tuned in such a way that it really feels like everything around you is real and does not go away when you aren't commanded to look in a certain direction. If something miles away really exists. One thing I was worried about when I went in was hearing some details about what the game entailed. I thought, I really am going to be exploring this whole solar system. That sounds like finding needles in haystacks. That sounds like I'm always going to be wondering if I've found everything. The game does a good job of at least giving you some structure so that open-ended nature that it really commits to, you can take a rest from it in your own mind by sticking to very specific goals and sort of making things small, at least in your perspective. You can give yourself tunnel vision willingly so that you can actually get through each individual loop. The game doesn't really present you with a lot of specific problems that you have to solve. It instead presents you with things to be curious about. That becomes a problem to solve. How do I find out more about this specific planet or this specific rule of the universe? Rather than the problem solving being the main source of tension and challenge, it's really just about that freedom, the freedom to decide what you're going to do. You get freedom through problem solving.
The main mechanic that you're relying on is a kind of reliable meaning out of absence, if you're willing to plumb underneath the surface of that space. You're just so determined to take all of this emptiness and discover what's really there. Otherwise, it feels quite distant from you. There's this great moment early on in Timber Hearth. It's like one of the first things. You start out, you're just putting your marshmallow up against the fire. You start walking away and there's this little tiny knee-high ledge that you have to jump onto. In most games, the way that you jump is you just tap a button and jump, but in this one, you have to bend your knees and then release. To me, that immediately signaled a kind of limitation, a sense of smallness and reality to the gravity of the planet that you're on. They set up a motif of thinking. They have you bend your knees and jump, and it's like, okay, physics, I need to pay attention to that. They have you interact with a practice version of your ship, and you can see it flying away and moving around, and that's your way of like learning how to fly the ship. It's immediately a disaster. That was a bit of foreshadowing too, creating the sense this thing is going to be really hard to do. There's physics to the ship. It's not going to do everything automatically for you. And then it makes it all the more harrowing when you actually get into your real ship. Because I had the sense, like the sort of flashback of how bad I did with the practice ship. Oh, this is just going to be way worse. And it kind of ups the stakes a little bit. And there's this sense like, oh, I really have to do some work to do well. There's not really anyone holding my hand through a lot of this. And this game, even though it starts off holding you very tightly in terms of the structure, it does give you enough information so that you really feel the pressure to need to be constantly thinking. You know that they're going to let you go at some point and you're going to be adrift and then you're going to have to deal with that. I thought that was cool, like these two little subtle hints just emphasizing distance and expanse and just smallness.
The game does a good job of really humbling you at every turn. The game is full of many deadly hazards, things that will kill you instantly or slowly. It's kind of a horror game. The game makes you feel small, it makes you feel afraid at times, but it also gives you a sense of control, and it shows you that that sense of control is also scary. When you realize how much control you have over your own direction in the game, you realize how many ways you can fail. You kind of get the good and the bad of a truly open-ended experience. I have absolute certainty that my playthrough of the game was really nothing like yours or anyone else's. That is another way in which it makes you feel small. It makes you feel like you are the only one looking through your set of eyes at this particular playthrough of the game. It's always based on what you want to learn when you want to learn it. The individual moments of discovery they all kind of blend together into an overall sense of the world. I understand that space a lot better than I did when I started. That is the overall aptitude that you're developing that brings you to the end of the game. You just read enough and go to enough places and do enough little physics experiments to understand there's something else I can do that I can use to actually reach an ending. But everything else is just building up that knowledge base.
Your starting point is very alone. A lot of games try to tell stories and they do it like films where they just have that cinematic element. It's like plots moving forward and characters that you're meeting. But because of the length of video games, it tends to elongate a bit too much. And because of the player-oriented control of games, the player actively ends up being very disruptive to the pace of storytelling. And so that makes storytelling kind of mediocre more often than not in some games. One of the things that some games use really well is they actually take player agency and they incorporate it into the design. It utilizes the Joseph Campbell hero's journey format. You become the hero embarking on this far-off journey. You're there and you're being told, hey, there's something that you have to do. There's an expedition that you have to embark upon in order to explore the star system that you're in, and you're going to become part of, through this initiation, a whole set of other explorers just like you. Early on in the museum, you see this little statue turn and look at you, and it grants you a power. And this is that classic hero's journey thing. The hero's there's a call to adventure. The hero has to leave their home, their comfortable space. They're going out into the unknown. There's so much that they have to learn in order to handle that. And they receive aid, and in the classic hero's journey stories, it's usually from a wizard or something. And in this case, they have a kind of wizard, which is these ancient Nomai creatures. The supernatural aid that you're given isn't like the ring of Lord of the Rings. In this one, it's a time loop. It's the fact that you get to experience the same 22 minutes of this star system's existence again and again, and that is a gift to you because it's the gift of information of what's to come. And that's something that everyone wishes they could have, but we can't. But it's hugely advantageous to know all of the repercussions of any one action, and then to be able to experiment with those repercussions. The cause and effect isn't just a single link that then deadens away all the other options. In this case, every cause and effect is a new link that you then play with, and so it's an abundance of options by the choices that you make. That's a superpower that you get from these Nomai when that statue stares at you. That is the beginning of this time loop, which just so happens to also be a symbolic death, which tends to be a major part of the hero crossing the threshold. You have this call to adventure, you have the supernatural aid, and you have the symbolic death of the character literally dying early on and then realizing that they can be reborn in some way. And in this case, you are literally reborn. The death comes from information. You learn something and then you become something by doing so. Who you were before is now dead. And in this case, the body of your character is literally dead. But the moment you first die in the game is the moment you realize you have this time loop happening. And then suddenly it's like, oh, I learned something about myself, and now I'm gonna go off on this journey. And there's various ways in which the rest of the story still matches that kind of hero's journey. There's the concept of the belly of the whale, where the hero has to go in some dark space where they're lost. So much of the spaces you're going to, the unknown aspect, the thing that's scariest about it is the sense of being trapped. You can often get stuck in many of the places that you go. You go deep into caverns, you go deep underwater, you go up into the sky. There's always this sensation of, I'm not going to be able to make my way back. And that's a big part of, after having crossed the threshold, the hero gets this sensation as if they don't have a tether anymore to the home that they once knew. And of course, the point of the hero's journey, the reason why it works in all of these different stories, is there has to come a return wherein the character goes through the fullness of the initiation and all the struggles therein, and they have to make a journey back to their home. They see it differently, and they're bringing something back new into the world. These games like The Witness, Tunic, and in this case Outer Wilds, they have this element where you, the player, are learning so much that eventually things that you've seen before many times suddenly have a new meaning to them. And so you're bringing back home what you've gained. The change in you becomes the thing that affects the world.
One takeaway that is almost universal among people who've played it and people who gather to discuss their interpretations of it is just that this game will make you feel something. It is a game that, almost better than the ways in which it piques your curiosity, it makes you realize something profound about yourself and about life and curiosity and about fear and about the unknown. It has some good sci-fi trappings. There's a lot of thought put into what does it feel like to experience this story in that way, where you're looping and you're making your own decisions and you're sort of weirdly in control of everybody's well-being because you wonder, is there a way that I can prevent this sun from exploding? And so you're given this immense responsibility and this crash course in the physics of your world. You're given all this knowledge and you have to figure out what to do with it. We'll talk more about this later when we talk about the ending, but it just has a lot of meaning to it, other than just the mechanics, although the mechanics are also brilliant.
Once you learn that you're locked into a time loop and you realize that the meaning is going to come from your own sense of discovery, and then there's quite a bit of metaphorical layering on top that you have to interpret, you're then tasked with the rough choice of where do I go next. For me, I decided to go to the Hourglass twins, which are these two planets in orbit around each other but directly integrated with each other. Because one is filled with ash and the other one is an ember planet sucking that sand into itself. It has this kind of weird vortex that's just pulling all of the ash from the other planet. This is such a perfect lesson in how to utilize the time loop, because you're given immediately this hourglass of time. You're being shown time's limitation, and you're thinking in terms of pockets of time that you want to utilize for yourself. The Ash Twin planet initially is fairly useless. When you first arrive there, there's nothing to see. It's just flat and smooth. When you go to the Ember Twin, it's just craggy and full of structures and a large emptiness in the center. It's very clear that there's a deep cavernous set of layers within the Ember Twin, and as you explore, you discover more and more about these caverns and you go deeper and deeper. The horror of all that, as you go into these confines, is that sense of hourglass time becomes a sense of impending death. The ash from this other planet is actually consuming the caverns that you're wandering through. Because you're desperate for information, you're trying to gather as much as you can. You have to somehow just get quicker and quicker and making your way deeper and deeper into this place, even though it actually makes you more and more confined to do so, and more at risk of dying in this horrifying, suffocating, claustrophobic way.
There's a section in Ember Twin where there are these vast ruins in a cavern. The ruins are the remains of a society, which means, of course, that there's a lot of information to be gathered there because there are notes to read. There's technology to study by interacting with it. Because there are all of these branching paths in that area, you have to eventually realize that this is a place that is going to be your tomb time and time again. You cannot explore it without allowing yourself to be crushed by sand over and over. That to me is an incredible metaphor, right? The way that you have to get comfortable with the limitations of your own life and just sort of be forced to meditate upon it instead of just viewing it as something that you're trying to desperately avoid. The Hourglass Twins are a brilliant concept, and they just look so beautiful. The idea of it is so unsettling, and it's one of the main examples of the world influencing where you can go and when. The world will make you feel small again by having so much power over you.
This is where the messaging system started to really develop for me in terms of understanding how I'm supposed to use the information that I'm learning. Because you have this device to translate text. And so you're looking on the walls and you're seeing all these circular, non-linear messages where everyone's talking to each other, but the conversations diverge at various points, and you can follow each of the different divergences to see the different sub-topics within the conversation. You're just seeing what your ancestors wrote, or what these ancestor explorers wrote, because they're actually not the ancestors to your species. They come from far, far away. You're gathering the information from them in order to try to utilize it to make your way through this sunless city. What was neat to me about exploring the sunless city for the first time is I started to really think about how this game is going to be reliant on learning strictly. Using the learning of others who had come before and building off of that in order to make your way through the world. In some ways, it's a lot like the process of just information buildup across societies, generation by generation. Like so much of what we do in our technology, in the philosophy of how we live life, even the kind of moral compass moving forward, which people tend to believe is a kind of progress, that is built off of the work of others having made a variety of mistakes so that we can just not repeat those mistakes, save ourselves time, and hopefully move forward in some new way. The whole Outer Wilds experience is that collaboration across generations just happening live. And you're partaking in that as your own kind of scientist doing experiments and just figuring out what is it that I need to do to accomplish my goals in this space.
The way that you are caught in this loop, it turns you into a collaborator with yourself, where you're sending yourself into a dangerous situation, perishing, and then the only thing that remains is your knowledge. That resembles like the very real connection to ancestors that we all have. These people who are dead now did make those mistakes. They did give us the knowledge that we are now building on. And our new purpose is equipped with their sense of the world and their knowledge. This way of putting things in perspective and allowing yourself to die and taking the only thing that remains, which is knowledge, to reach new heights that you couldn't before. That's such an interesting and fascinating metaphor for the scientific method in general, which is basically the process of collaborating with others to replicate an event over and over to receive the data that comes from that. There's this detachment that comes from going through the loop over and over, and that detachment resembles being willing to accept things as they really are and learn about the world as it really is rather than as you want it to be.
you become a scientist leaving behind the data of numerous experiments that you ran yourself, and then handing them off to your future self to continue the experiments. One of the things I was reading about fairly recently was about Francis Bacon. One of the major innovations that he brought to science, and he's sort of viewed as the father of experimental science in terms of the way that we know it, and the father of the scientific method as we use it, even though there's been variations of that method going back to the ancient Greeks and even before. His major contribution to science was that he actually realized that the usefulness of science is not a method for the individual to just utilize in order to do a great experiment and then move on and have the information that he needs. It was a method that could replicate and be redone, and the usefulness of the scientific method is to make a series of steps for replication. The point of the whole thing was so that you would collaborate with as many other individuals as you can in order to accumulate knowledge over time. Because the truth is that no one person can get enough data to truly know something generally applicable. The Solomon's house, that was his idea. You would have this institute of researchers, and they're all working together collaboratively. The major challenge for all of science is that it is an inductive form of reasoning, in the sense that it's taking data from small scale experiences, stacking them on top of each other, and then generalizing that data to a normative claim about the rest of the world. And of course, that is quite a leap to take. Even if you have thousands of examples, you're generalizing towards potentially an infinite supply of examples. And his method of dealing with that is to allow the accumulation to build off of a range of biases, because every single scientist is going to come at each experiment with a slightly different bias that they're not fully aware of. Francis Bacon encouraged a system in which the bias is cut out by repetition through various different people, letting everyone be who their flawed bias selves, and actually creating a system that doesn't hide from the bias but just accounts for it. And then hopefully you'll get some kind of general view of the world from that. And so this game has taken that concept of collaboration and scientific method, and it's building an entire gameplay design around you doing that and you running these experiments. That's the kind of play at the center of much of what you're doing. And so you just set yourself up for all these death moments, but it's worthwhile because, well, at least I'm learning something in the process. That is the bulk of the game. You have this expectation that you're going to be continuously updating your sense of what the rules are in this world. And as you're updating your sense of the rules, that's giving you a new way to know how to maneuver within that space. Ember Twin was like a natural tutorial for that, because as you go deeper and deeper into the caverns, the sand is filling up and you know that your time is extremely limited, and you're being given directions where exactly to go. But in order to do so efficiently, because the sand's filling up and so your destination is going to be filling up and you're going to lose access to all that information, you really have to remember the information of where to go in the caverns so then you can get there in time and utilize it. You are training yourself to just use information quickly and make information the tool that you access, almost like a random access memory just ready to go.
The fact that you are following another's footsteps makes an otherwise scary situation so much more comforting. These instructions are a way of guiding your every step. These are steps that have clearly been trodden by specific people. They are a race of people with names. They're talking to each other directly in these written records. These scrolls are basically records of conversations that they're having with each other. They're not really trying to just explain what's happening to each other or to future generations. They aren't strictly just signposts. It's a record of their lives together and their mutual interest in exploring everything around them.
That was a genuinely surprising element of the scrolls. You know, with FromSoft games, often the writing in the world or a lot of the remnants of past civilizations, that's all bonus information for those semi-historian gamers who just want to fill out a timeline of what came before. And it's not usually integral to what you're doing. I was really surprised at how much the writing was pointing to generations upon generations of characters with worries and relationships with each other. And as you jump from planet to planet and you sort of are picking up more and more writing, as you explore deeper into any one planet, you're also delving deeper into the ongoing drama of some of these relationships. People flirt with each other very lightly. People make jokes with each other about the sort of inventions that are being done or about some of the foolish experimentation that they were attempting. The writing that you use as instruction is often written precisely because they were worried for each other and they wanted to help each other through an experience. So back to those caverns in the Ember Twin, the reason they were guiding their fellow explorers through the different directions in those caverns is because they just didn't want them to die. And they didn't know that you were going to come generations and generations later, and that this entirely separate species is going to be reading this stuff. It has that quality of stumbling on to writing on a bathroom stall, a back and forth between people whose faces you never get to know and whose voices you don't get to hear, but whose relationship to each other in this punctuated, separated time becomes a relationship you just witness voyeuristically on the side. You're using that learning intuitively to actually help yourself, but you're also growing in relation to them, weirdly. And this them that is being teased is an entirely separate species from the character that you are. When you're on Timber Hearth at the very beginning of the game and you're seeing all of those villagers with the 4 eyes, these are new explorers to this star system. They're just as curious about these Nomai who came before as you are. As you're learning about these Nomai, you're really learning about great ancestors. You're building off of the backs of what they had done or what they had learned. It is a video game form in microcosm of all civilizational life, because the mathematics that you and I learn in high school is a long accumulation of generations and generations of information just stacking one on top of the other. This game is trying to mimic that sense of stack. The context at which you're reading their information now has whole new meaning precisely because you're many generations later. And that's really making that information valuable in a way that it couldn't have been to them. And that's the only clue that there's a chance for progress, is that they didn't fully make it. There's a goal that you learn that they have, and we'll talk about that at length, but there's a goal that they have, and you know that they didn't fully accomplish it. And the only sense that you might be able to accomplish it is just because you have slightly more information than them, just because they're in the past. And there's something about the past being locked and stuck and unwavering that makes it tinge more in your control. And that's where the kind of puzzle and thoughtfulness comes in.
The game really demonstrates that the future can change so much. This entire species went extinct on a certain level thinking that they had failed. That was how it ended, is that they died not quite completing their mission. And they couldn't have known what their impact was going to be into the future. We know based on the state of their remains and their completely bare skeletons that they've been dead for a very long time, potentially thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. But they used to be alive once, and they used to be young, and they used to be as curious as the current generation. That connection of curiosity, the fact that you can so naturally look at what they wanted to explore and decide, I want to explore that too, sort of proves that each generation is actually not just living their individual life, but living a multi-generational life, especially in the name of gathering knowledge. That scientific curiosity, it's made by these people, but it's given to people that they will never meet.
There's this even sadder realization of long history. There's this concept of deep time. It's just this notion of getting a taste of a pre-human time. It creates this kind of yawning emptiness between yourself and something that's otherwise familiar. It's that feeling of deep time that puts things in perspective and also can sometimes humble you, because we are, of course, on the basis of having accumulated information and accumulated knowledge and useful knowledge, there's a kind of overconfidence that can accumulate as well. And it's that reminder of the ways in which you're building off of people who suffered and contemplated and created for things that you couldn't relate to, and yet you're just seeing the remnants of it, and there will be remnants of you too. It's that whole Ozymandias poem by Percy Shelley, where it's just that reminder of like there's generations and generations of kings and statues and beauty, and it's all gone. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Outer Wilds takes you to worlds of Ozymandias decay, back to back, and sometimes you learn how to move forward with it, but sometimes it makes moving forward feel even more emptier than it did before you even had the information to begin with, because you are just another cog in this long chain of generational learning.
It's about an entire species that has been wiped out, the most ultimate form of destruction. But in the wake of that destruction, there actually are works upon which to despair. There actually are things that you can see. It's not all buried. It kind of puts a happier spin on the idea that we will all one day be gone.
It makes you think about how different the value of life is when you know you have progeny and when you don't. When you know that there will be people who come after you, so that all the creations that you've done aren't just for those who exist now, but will be built upon by a future generation. And that's the challenge that we face right now. We sort of wonder about what are the effects of the world going 100 years from now? How different is the climate going to be? How different will we relate to one another? What shifts will occur because of artificial intelligence even? And it makes you think, what if we are the last generation? And what does that change about the meaning of now? How much of meaning is attached to this unconscious attachment to future? And when that future is taken away, well, what's left? This worry about progeny in this game brings together the fear and general concept of one's mortality and the inevitable end of the universe. In this case, this star system has a star at the very center of it that they know will explode eventually. It's the same situation that we have on Earth with our own solar system. We know that the sun is eventually going to die. And they're aware that at some point they're going to run out of time. So time becomes a general motif throughout the whole game of just continuously making you think about like your own relationship to time. And you as the player, you get to actually loop in time. One of the questions that I think is very natural to begin to wonder as you play and go further and further into the game is, how does this loop happen? Why is this loop happening to you? Because as far as you're concerned, it just emerges out of death. You die and you're suddenly warped back in time. And the only signal of some kind of control over this loop or some kind of agency starting the loop in the first place is just the statue that looks at you. Because when it looks at you, that seems to be the impetus for you actually having the experience of being able to loop. So on Ember Twin, alongside seeing all of these characters in their writing on the walls and starting to understand their goals on these planets and their attempt to try and make discoveries and experiment in various ways, you can eventually, after you explore the Sunless City in detail, after you get really good at going there faster and faster, you can eventually access what's called a high energy lab deep inside of the Ember Twin planet. And in this high energy lab is one of the first and clearest demonstrations of what may be the kernel that grows into your ability to time travel. And that is the experimentation that was being done by many of these Nomai on black holes and white holes. They started to learn how to create black holes and white holes and actually utilize them and begin to run experiments on how they function. And in the process of running these experiments, something really shocking is discovered. And that is the fact that every time you go through a black hole and you emerge out of the other side, things emerging out of the white hole are appearing a few seconds prior to the time that they enter in through the black hole. And they're quite confused about this initially, and you, the player, probably I wondered, what is the significance of that? Why are they telling me that it just goes a few seconds back? As you learn more and more about this, it becomes clear that, oh, this technology maybe is the very, very early starting point of what leads to time travel entirely. But then, of course, the question is still in the air, why would you want to time travel?
The place in which they discuss and learn about these discoveries is called the High Energy Lab, because even though this is a property of all warping, it always brings you back in time by some small degree. They realize that you can add energy to that process. The more energy they can add to this process leads to a greater gap with which you are arriving earlier than you departed in time. If you add enough energy, you can effectively send things back in time noticeably.
And this quickly creates a dangerous incentive. One of the arguments that you can witness at least a little bits of is, well, what do we do with this information that if we were to increase the energy enough, maybe we can travel further back in time? And once you have that information, well, then the question is, well, how much are you willing to increase the energy? And like, what does that mean exactly? They start to realize that the perfect amount of energy to cause a black hole, white hole time dilation split that they can then utilize as a form of time travel would come from the death of the sun itself, the sun bursting into a supernova and destroying the entire star system, which of course is the end of everything there. That end can serve as a beginning, can serve as a way to go back in time. This is like that temptation of all knowledge. There's this concept of the black ball, and it's this thought experiment by the philosopher Nick Bostrom, and he sort of throws it out there as this basic thing to wonder about in terms of the luck that we have in history, about the accumulation of information over time. Seems like it would inevitably lead to some information that is fundamentally dangerous. The obvious is nuclear war. We came up with the technology to slam atoms or cut them in half and cause massive explosions that could theoretically ripple bigger and bigger and destroy the entire planet. That was the fear before the nuclear bomb actually dropped, was that, hey, what if this ripple of atoms cascading and destroying each other and splitting because of that high energy usage? What if that just never stopped and it just kept spreading further and further through the atmosphere and just destroyed the Earth? When the first atom bomb was dropped, that was the risk. It's this idea that like, okay, that's one kind of information, but it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot to make that happen. But what happens when we get information that is easy to do? We right now have access to CRISPR, which is gene editing. We can change our human genome and experiment on ourselves and just see what the potential outcome of that is. But what's to stop someone from using that otherwise very easy technology and experimenting on some other kind of disease starting property in the world and actually releasing that, causing a pandemic far worse than anything that we could imagine and far harder to rectify? And what if that information were to just get out there? Information where the technology is so easily accessible that it becomes a fundamental danger to even talk about it. This technology that these Nomai discover about time travel, that becomes a kind of potential black ball technology of a great deal of power in being able to actually go back and reverse through time. The fact that the use of this power requires the actual destruction of the whole star system, that is information of great power emerging out of destruction, and you need the destruction to make it happen. Part of the debate you start to witness is just these characters struggling with, what do we do with this information? How do we actually use it safely? The obsession at the center of the whole thing, the reason why the Nomai even came to the star system in the first place, is because of a signal that they had intercepted. Whatever star system they came from, they had some kind of radio receiver which received a signal far, far away on the star system that you're playing at in Outer Wilds. And it looks like an eye. The signal itself appears like an eye on the receiver. Then that became this obsession of, well, we need to go there. What is this other life? Or what is this thing that's sending the signal? What does it mean? And whole religions can pop up on the basis of that. At some point you get access to like an old church. And so you can see that the Nomai became kind of really obsessed with this. The whole birth of all of the learning that they seem to be doing, so much of the technology advancement that you witness from the Nomai is really just them trying to learn more and more and more about the world so that eventually they can gain access to the ability to actually reach this eye. This time travel thing becomes one of the major steps in that course of reaching the eye, because they believe that they can actually send out probes and search for that eye, but of course they don't know where to send the probe. And so one solution is to send it so continuously and persistently across what would usually take lifetimes, many millions of attempts or firings of the probe, and then hoping that one of them hits the eye, and then you can use that information to then travel back in time and actually know where the eye is located. If you could loop the same 22 minutes, then you can loop a constant search in time, and then you just need a way to carry that information back. Now, of course, at the time that we enter the high energy lab, we don't know anything about how they're going to send the information back. But we know that now that they have access to this time loop, now they have a means of infinite information gathering. Of course, they have to be willing to destroy their universe in order to actually do it.
All of the information that we receive as we explore about the Nomai is piecemeal, and it's accumulating into a wider sense of what they are as a species and what they're interested in. Just based on this information about their desire to use the sun's explosion to power this time travel, and the fact that that's all in service of discovering where the eye is by sort of brute forcing their search, it makes them, at this point, with only that knowledge, seem very single-minded. It goes back to that temptation that you mentioned. The way in which sometimes the gathering of information, it can lead to sort of suffocating the possibility of exploring other options. Once you have destroyed the sun, there is no other discovering to do. Our goals can so funnel us into a particular ideal where we're chasing something. We have stopped chasing the thing that gave us that goal in the first place, which is curiosity. We have learned and learned, and that's how technology advances, that's how history advances and culture. Everything grows with knowledge. But if we take that knowledge and we put it into a single-minded goal, we sort of eliminate the chance of doing any more exploring.
Yeah, the reason the eye signal to them was even significant in the first place was curiosity about what it is. That emerges from a general curiosity that must have existed prior. Once they learn about this eye, through a long chain of history, they seem to have become completely myopic about what they care about. It really becomes just about the eye. When we're reading these records of these conversations between these characters, it's almost like we're witnessing a Middle Ages in which they really are becoming scholastic scholars in regards to just one thing, and that is the understanding of this eye. And for some reason, they put all of the meaning that seems to matter to them into the finding of this thing. And they really don't know that it will mean anything. Frankly, they could arrive at the eye and it would be a long dead civilization just like the one that they are to us. That seems like a gamble that doesn't have the best odds in terms of that actually being a valuable outcome. But they seem completely hell-bent on it. It really becomes obsessive, but the humanness of the characters in terms of the complexity of their relationships makes you really understand and sympathize with them because they really are just discoverers. It's sort of the same bind that I guess we all get in. Us as enlightened empiricists trying to grasp the world on the basis of measurement, we have this fundamental faith that truth will save us, that if you continuously pursue truth, that it will matter, there will be some grand outcome that makes it all worthwhile, or at least the process of pursuing truth is a worthy process in and of itself. Of course, truth could go awry. The truth could lead to the very thing that destroys you. The other question is, what if the pursuit of truth requires such a constant consumption of resources that by the time you reach any truth that matters, you have completely destroyed the material conditions that allow that truth to even exist? Ergo, potentially what's happening to our own planet Earth in regards to climate shifts. The very industry that allows great technology is also the thing that prompts the atmosphere to get vengeance upon us. It's kind of a sad reality, like maybe we don't get some end. And again, this is analogous to the medieval scholars who had their lodestar that they were aiming toward be God himself, and the belief that through intense scholarship and scrutiny of text, through years and years of devotion in universities to nothing but scouring the text more and more carefully, being as scholastic as possible, you will find some truth about God. Every generation seems to fall back into that little point, that peak of experience that we aim toward, and we believe that we're going to get something out of that. But the eye could just as well be the same truth that we pursue now in the 21st century, and maybe it's the same futile end that we're going to experience. Who knows? There's something real about that yearning that they have for knowledge. And there's something real about the tease of that initial eye signal and how much that can consume and completely confine one's perspective and one's vision, to the point that by the time that we are there and exploring the ruins of the civilization, they were on the brink of purposely themselves destroying the entire star system on a plan that they could only test once. And it's by only the luck of the gamble that the test actually worked. But they didn't know that when they were planning to actually destroy the star system and make this happen. There's something very real about that. And it fits the physics and the complicated science and all the stuff that's wrapped up in Outer Wilds. Like, it really kind of fits. This is a game about knowledge and its potential repercussions, because the search of knowledge is wondrous and dangerous at the same time. At some point we go to Brittle Hollow, a planet wherein the entire crust of the planet is cracking and being sucked into a black hole at the very center of it. And this is the black hole that they use to learn about how to understand that time dilation. So you visit there, and it's another utilization of time, just like time was utilized in Ember Twin and Ash Twin. This utilization of time has the same marker of fear, which is that you will die, except in this case, you will die not by being crushed by sand, but instead death will come very slowly by you having been sucked into a black hole, emerged on the very edges of the galaxy, far, far away from any sustenance or your ship or any savior, and so you know that you're just gonna float in nothingness once you fall through. A slow, patient, boring suffocation in space. That is the horror at the center of Brittle Hollow. But Brittle Hollow is also the place where you get to see more of the community that the Nomai started to develop. You see a little village on the surface, and it suggests that there was a time prior, long before this brittle planet started to break into the black hole at the center, when whole towns were living on this planet. A society was burgeoning and growing with schools and various apartments and long passageways where these Nomai seemed to believe that they could safely traverse underneath the crust of the planet, and that it seemed like with the kinds of structures that they were building, there was this belief that they would have all the time in the world, that this thing that you're now currently afraid of, which is the black hole, wasn't really an issue for them, and so they were able to just live that way. And that is where you see some of the religious iconography. You start to see the ways in which the eye really becomes something that they are obsessed with. This is also the place where you see the schools that develop. So you know that the Nomai traveled from a distant star system, and then you have all these kids who are growing up on this star system, and this star system is their home now. And so you have the schism of relationship. It's sort of the schism that occurs with any first generation immigrant family, where the immigrants from one country carry with them all of the culture and assumptions and beliefs from their home, and their kids have a totally new relationship to the space, because to them it's not foreign. To them it is the only home that actually exists, that actually matters. And so you start to see these like kids grow up and try to learn, but they know that they're within the confines of the only learning that matters on the basis of what they're taught to have matter is, how are we going to get to this eye? One of the means of reaching this eye, or as near to it as possible, is to embark on a journey to a mysterious object that disappears and reappears throughout the planetary system, the quantum moon. The mysterious qualities it exhibits become parallel to the mystery of the eye itself. And so the Nomai seek its flickering existence in order to reach nearer the eye in the only way currently feasible. And Brittle Hollow reveals the steps along this journey.
This is where you discover that one of the almost religious, almost spiritual obsessions of the Nomai is this quantum moon and making pilgrimages to it. The Nomai, and also you in the distant future, have to parse out, how do you land on a moon that keeps disappearing? The Nomai have studied everything about the quantum moon very carefully, and they've collected some of the most important knowledge about it in this big ruined building called the Tower of Quantum Knowledge. And that tower is situated in a fairly obvious location on Brittle Hollow. It can't miss it. It's a huge structure. But unfortunately, once you arrive at the entrance, it becomes very clear that there's no way to actually get inside. That the gravity bridge that allows you to go into the depths of the tower is completely collapsed. The information you have to remember at this point is that Brittle Hollow is collapsing into the black hole. Once you've connected these two ideas, that you can't access the Tower of Quantum Knowledge because you can't fly upward high enough, and the Tower of Quantum Knowledge is also going to fall into the black hole at some point in this loop, it is at that point you have to confront your horrible, well-founded fear of this black hole. You have to dive directly into it after the Tower of Quantum Knowledge, and then in the vacuum of space, finally explore the treasure of knowledge that's contained within.
Much like what the Nomai are hoping to do in terms of time travel and using the high energy explosion of the sun to travel back in time, you yourself are taking something otherwise frightening and powerful and destructive and using it to access new information. And that's exactly what you do. You allow the Tower of Quantum Knowledge to fall into the black hole. You follow after it, you emerge in the white hole, you traverse upward through the tower in this zero gravity space, and then you finally get to learn the key to this quantum moon, which is that the quantum moon seems to be traveling throughout the whole star system. The moon seems to keep showing up around pretty much every planet in the star system, and every time you try to land on it, it just disappears. Its movement seems reliant on how often it is observed. So when you're looking at it from afar, it doesn't move. As soon as you look away, it will disappear. You learn that there is a final location that it goes to, and that location might be the eye itself. that might be the destination that the Nomai are hoping to reach. Part of this pilgrimage that they do is out of a kind of religious fervor and testament to the center of the knowledge that they're pursuing. They will find a way to get onto the moon, and you don't know yet how to do this. And once you're on the moon, you make sure that the tower on the moon ends up on the north pole of the moon. And there's a tower that's as quantum as everything else, because really everything on this moon has that quantum quality of needing to be looked at to exist, and then glance away and it's in a completely different space. It's all of the parallel universes at once, and you're sort of picking and choosing which one actually exists in the actual world. Once you can get this tower to the north, you can emerge with the quantum moon around the eye itself. This is quite the heavy build-up to this. This idea that you could get to that destination, but somehow that's not enough. These Nomai pilgrims who were doing this pilgrimage again and again, they were letting the moon get to around the eye, and it was just so that they can look at it. So now we have this actual long tale of history where the eye was initially a source of information, and now the eye has lost its practical value and become purely a source of awe and wonder. Much like how religious texts can lose priority of its pragmatic information over time and really become just about the identity and association with the thing. And you can have worship of the thing in and of itself removed from its effectiveness in the world any longer. And in some cases, beliefs can extend long past their expiration date on the basis not of superior lessons or morals or truths about the world, but merely on the basis of, well, it's what we've always pursued, so now I'm going to pursue it ongoing. And in this case, it's like a perfect example of that. The Nomai just want to be able to stare at the eye now. And there's a bunch of them who just want to look at it, and that's it. And just be as close to it as possible, and it's that religious fervor that becomes the thing that matters, and not the knowledge itself. Now, this is not all the Nomai. This is only a subset of them, the ones who attach themselves to this church. Many of the other Nomai who you're reading about in the various texts that swirl, those Nomai are actually genuinely still curious and still trying their best to learn about the world. And it's almost like this evolutionary branch between those who saw the value in a belief structure that led to meaning, and then using that as furtherance of pursuit of meaning, and then another branch of those who saw the thing as granting meaning, and then the meaning is all there is anymore, and that's the only thing that matters. That applies to every belief ever. I mean, think about, like, why did we invent religious belief in the first place? Why did we begin to believe in these wondrous things? We were looking for explanations of the world. And then at some point, there is a segment of population that stops looking for explanations and forgets that initial impetus of value. And it just becomes about holding fast to the meaning and forgetting the actual search. There's clearly like this psychological habit that also seems to be on display in the Nomai. The Nomai are very human in that way.
These two alternative ways of thinking about the eye, depending on how the Nomai are sort of culturally attributing meaning to it, it results in this interesting illustration of how two different ways of looking at something can ultimately become equally useful in the future, because to you, it's really important that these people make these reverent pilgrimages to the quantum moon, because it allows you to learn more about the nature of it in a way that the scientists who are pursuing the eye itself and its location just don't have time to discover. They don't have the interest in understanding the quantum moon itself in the way that these worshippers do. The fact that they are both free to pursue knowledge in completely different ways allows the total amount of knowledge to increase for anyone who's doing a survey of all of that, because the worshippers of the quantum moon truly want to know what it is in a way that the people who are searching for its location have no interest. They don't want to know what it is ahead of time. They don't want to ponder it. They just want to find it. They're two equal but completely separate levels of analysis of the same thing.
They each have different frames of appreciating the same information, and those frames, the boundaries of each stretches in a different direction. On the edge of that boundary for one frame, you're granted significant meaning that is different than the edges of the boundaries of another frame. It's almost like a Venn diagram where they meet in the middle about the central focus of what they care about, and then they spread out into these, in some cases, quite distant directions, but they're all on the plane that matters, and that plane that matters is what actually is there. It kind of reminds me of what William James was trying to do. He was a philosopher, early psychologist. He kind of is like the founder of psychology in some ways. But he had this idea of pure pragmatism in terms of truth. His view was that the only thing that's really true is what is useful or what can be used. I'm not promoting that view, I'm just explaining it. But the thing that's interesting about the view is why he wanted to have that view. He wrote this book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And in that book, he was interviewing numerous believers of various different faiths and denominations. And he was trying to understand, well, what is the point of believing in something like this when it seems so contrary to the latest emergent knowledge in that particular time? And this is the time of post-enlightenment, like we're really changing dramatically in terms of our understanding of the world. And he grew to be hugely sympathetic for these people because he found that the kind of meaning that they were gaining from this belief was immensely useful to the exact kind of life that they have, because it is somewhat irrational to expect that every person's going to want to be a rigorous, scientifically minded type. There is a place in existence where you can just be okay with the thing that we all want in life, which is a kind of satisfaction and comfort in our space and in ourselves. His relationship with all of those people got him to think there must be a different way of talking about truth that isn't quite so hard-hearted. I think he even had the word of there are tough-hearted individuals and there are tender-hearted folk. And he wanted to distinguish the two, not to say that one is better than the other, but to understand that in some ways you don't have a choice between being the tough-minded or the tender-minded. You don't have a choice between which field you lock yourself into, but that there is worth in being a person who just wants to feel okay in the world and having an answer that accomplishes that perfectly. And if that is your goal, why is that not a good enough truth? If your other goal is actual point of fact, some kind of noumena, as Kant would put it, of the world that is true beyond the phenomenal view that we have of it, if that is your version of truth, then you can be the tough-minded type to pursue that and never get satisfaction. But it is not irrational to be the sort to want to be satisfied, to actually want to just live at peace with oneself. The Nomai are illustrating that same divide, and the information that we learn is immensely useful, it turns out. Their obsession with the quantum moon and trying to understand the eye religiously becomes an accumulation of information that, it turns out, the end of this game is completely reliant on you discovering. The actual solution to this grand problem, which had enamored the scientists for so long in terms of how to solve, requires the information only learned through a quote-unquote foolish faith. And that is interesting, that the game includes both kinds of knowledge, and you as this far distant, far in the future observer get to actually observe from the outside the two spheres of knowledge and how the ways in which they don't overlap is also meaningful too, beyond just the ways in which they overlap.
The game does such a good job of showing just the pursuit of knowledge in general as a diverse process of completely different, legitimate ideals. Everybody who produces useful information for the player is in some way devoting themselves to something. They're devoting themselves to a pursuit, whether that's to a specific scientific discovery or just some religious awe on the quantum moon. None of it is for you. None of it is for some ultimate survey of truth. It's about making sure that you get to the bottom of the truth that you want to discover. A personal sense of curiosity rather than some idea that you are going to have all of the information lined up and you will know exactly what is true about everything. No one ever discovers everything that there is to know. If anyone is, as a people, to grow their knowledge, we have to accept that no single one of us is going to know everything. That we are going to have to limit ourselves to being just one of many diverse individuals in the crowd of people who are contributing to a larger culture, an ever-growing base of knowledge.
There is a vessel which is the main ship that the Nomai use to travel far, far through space to get to the star system that you're at. This vessel is still here in the star system. If you can discover where the eye is located, then you could use this vessel to actually get there. When you start the game, the only thing that seems to matter is just stopping this loop. And as you go further and further into the game, you start to learn that there is a purpose behind the loop. And the purpose behind that loop has something to do with this eye at the center of everything. And it's merely a signal that suggests something worthwhile. And this eye is somehow connected to this quantum material dispersed seemingly evenly throughout the star system. All these little objects like quantum rocks and things that disappear when you're not looking and reappear when you do. And so now you have additional steps of curiosity. And then on Brittle Hollow, you learn there's also a vessel, the way to get to the eye. So now the direction that you're going is, well, then I should learn where the eye is. I should finish the thing that they started. I should take everything that they accomplished and the entirety of their civilization, why the civilization is now gone, and I should be the one to end it, to actually do it all the way through. I'm going to finish up this vast science experiment, even though I don't yet know fully what this science experiment entails. But thankfully, the next planet you go to, Giant's Deep, starts to give some fundamental answers. Giant's Deep for me is the quintessential location in Outer Wilds. It is the place where, depending on when you arrive there, because of course you can go to any planet at any time, it is either going to be the beginning of many threads of knowledge that you begin to follow, or the very end of that long line of threads that you, the player, are twining together into one solid rope of information. Giant's Deep itself is also a perfect distillation of the game design philosophy of these planets, in that each planet relies on danger in contrast to discovery. As soon as you break the barrier of its atmosphere, appears to be one of the most frightening planets of all. It appears messy and twirling with literal tornadoes, masses of them, 10 to 15 tornadoes, all floating throughout the whole planet. And as these tornadoes collide into the various islands strewn along the waters of this huge, mass, watery planet, it will then lift those islands high into the sky and then crash them down deep into the waves. And if you, as the explorer, are brave enough, you can look down yourself, look down into the depths of the water, and you will see something coiling there in the center, kind of bright but distant, weird, glowing creatures floating in and out. The current is so strong that you can't do anything more but peer. But it's clearly hints of danger, hints of temptation because of how purely dangerous it appears. It makes you all the more curious still. But at the same time, this planet is also the thing that has been calling you from the very, very beginning of the game. At the start of each run, at the start of each day, you blink open your eyes and you see a great big explosion on the side of the orbit of the Giant's Deep. And you can see that planet every single time. And it's as if the game is telling you to go there. Like should be one of the first places you go. Now for me, it wasn't one of the first places. I went to almost all the other planets before I fully explored Giant's Deep, and perhaps for me, that is because of the fear attached to the immenseness of it. It tempts you, and you wonder, why is this planet always there? That is the yearning that calls us forward. Something that you start to learn with all of the planets is, because you're not the only explorer, you're always guaranteed to find someone else there if you know what to look for. When you first arrive in Giant's Deep and you're traversing carefully in between all the tornadoes and trying to stay above the raging waters, you can meet Gabbro, a fellow explorer who actually knows more than most.
He's probably the most chill guy in the whole solar system. It seems like nothing phases him. Even as you talk to him, he will often be launched into the atmosphere with you as he simply continues to play his flute. He seems not to even make a big deal of the huge discovery he's made, a discovery that you also made at the beginning of the game. He is part of the loop with you. He has experienced every single time that the sun has exploded. And so he tells you basically that his encounter with one of the statues which he found on this planet is what allowed him to be part of the loop with you. So that confirms that there's significance to the statues. And he also points you to the fact that there is an island upon which he found that statue and other statues like it. He gives you a little bit of direction as to what might be significant on this planet.
You can go to this island, and once you actually enter into this space and you begin to look at the dialogue trees attached to these statues, you soon learn that these are mechanisms being built into a system, a broad, long-term system that relates very much to what we were talking about before, about what they had discovered about the time travel, going between the black holes and the white holes, how there's a slight dilation in time. Given enough power, you can increase that dilation even more. They needed a solution to the problem of information loss. If you were to travel back in time, well, you are a particle alongside everything else, and so you would lose all that information that you had just gained. So if you live the full 22 minutes and then you actually travel back, well, sorry, but the particles that make up your memory would also reverse. And so they needed a solution to that basic problem. And so what they did is they made a statue that locks information into it, and it can be linked up to different nomai or a machine, which we'll talk about, and then that can transfer the information back. What they decided to use this technique for is to essentially have the ability to control randomness. Something that we all desire. Like every time we make a choice in life, we then get to see the consequences of that choice. And sometimes there is external factors that we couldn't predict that then play a major force in the outcome of that. And there's a yearning for being able to redo it. And in some sense, what the nomai really needed, because they had this plan to get to the eye. That was the big goals. We need to get to the eye. But of course, they don't have unlimited time to do that. So the only thing they could really do is just point in a direction, shoot a probe out in that direction, and then just catch the eye. But of course, if you don't know where you're shooting, it truly is a roll of the dice. There is a version of reality where I buy a lottery ticket and I win the first time. There is a version of the nomai's reality where they shoot the probe and they just get completely lucky and just get it the first time. And what they wanted to be able to do is to use this information return system so that they can just cut through that gamble and have the dice roll all the millions of times that it needs to roll, all the different attempts to find that eye. And the one time they find it, that's the information that matters. And that's the information that will go back to the beginning of the loop so that they can actually just have that one perfect shot. That is what you're seeing. At the beginning of the game, every time you're opening your eye and then you just see this little explosion, that explosion is a single probe rocketing away from Giant's Deep and being shot out into a random location in space. And the command that's being sent back to that probe at the beginning of each 22 minutes is shoot off with the maximum amount of energy, so much so that it causes the probe to blow up. But that maximum amount of energy is used to shoot the probe as far as possible, and the hope is that on millions of attempts of just shooting in every possible direction, they will eventually find the eye, and then that information can be sent back and the nomai can use it to actually go there.
Every time you see this orbital probe cannon exploding at the beginning of each loop, it calls attention to itself in so many ways. It's a beautiful little spark that happens at the beginning. It's the first thing you see, but it's also the only thing that you see which seems to happen differently every time. It calls attention to itself by not being like clockwork the way that everything else in the game is. Even before you know anything about the orbital probe cannon, you know that there's something special about it. It's shooting in a different direction for every loop. The beacon effect that it has also it's caused by that sense of oddity. Like, why does this thing seem to be attached to the loop in such a way that it can act differently each time? As if it's almost aware, as if it's receiving information about where it shot last. It's a really interesting hint that you are given literally before anything starts.
There's a general sense of complete commitment to a cause happening here. Once they figure out that they can actually go back in time, using the energy of the sun's destruction, with enough power, the transference from the black hole to the white hole will dilate enough that it will go back 22 minutes. And with enough power, separately, we can shoot the probe off far enough so that we might actually be able to reach the eye. And both of those in tandem could lead to an endless loop where eventually we get to find the information necessary to then be able to stop the loop, because then we can finally have the eye's location. That was the idea, that was the goal. But you're not playing as the nomai. What you're doing the whole time you're exploring this entire vast star system with all these planets is you are searching through ruins of a dead civilization. Clearly something went horribly wrong for them. And that horror is the fact that the loop is happening, but it's not happening the way that they wanted. What they were hoping for was that they were going to be able to blow up the sun themselves. Of course, we talked about this. It's literally the most destructive technology possible. But they had a belief that it was going to be okay because that destruction, just like so much of what you're doing as a player, that destruction leads to discovery, leads to something additive and new. They believed that they could do that, and it failed.
The failure you discover when you finally reach that sun station is that they aren't able to make a dent in the sun in the first place. The very thing that they need to start this entire project off just doesn't work. You can't cause a supernova, at least with any way that they were able to attempt. They shot something into it, it didn't matter. For them, the entire project was basically just one big series of paperweights floating around the solar system. The only reason that you are special, the only reason that you are able to make it work is because you happen to exist at the natural end of your sun's life cycle. This is a terrible discovery because you realize that the sun is just exploding because it's been getting ready to do that for a very long time. There's no ending that cycle. That part of the cycle is always going to happen. There's nothing artificial about it. Since you know that this is the last moments of your entire little civilization, there's really nothing left to do but finish what the Nomai started. There's only 22 minutes left in your entire history. You may as well figure out what is going on with the Eye of the Universe.
They had set everything up perfectly. They set up these memory stones to carry information back. They set up this probe to shoot at random directions at the beginning of every single loop. And the idea is the information being sent back at the end of the loop is then telling the probe to fire in the first place. The probe was never going to fire until it got that reverse information from the sun exploding. So because they never got to explode the sun themselves, it never fired. Not to the degree that they wanted it to fire, which was the full extent of the power to actually destroy the probe. When you figured this out, that the sun is still exploding, but not in the way they wanted, which means that it's millions of years later, right? Because they knew that the sun will die. Our sun and our own solar system will die. We all know that. But we know it in that very distant kind of, oh, it's not our problem sense. For them, it wasn't their problem either because it wasn't going to happen for millions of years. And then you're there and you're realizing that, okay, all of this stuff I'm discovering about the Nomai is truly ancient. It's as if we discovered the dinosaurs had set something in motion that requires the Earth to be how it is for us now. There's been a long chasm of time and space, and it's been waiting for this loop to start. You happen to arrive at the point where the information's being sent back, telling these statues to record, to tether themselves to a being so that it can send information back. It's all been prompted by your own star's destruction. This loop has been going seemingly forever, and you just happen to have stumbled into that timeline. Now that it's found its mark, it has the coordinates for reaching this long, far-off eye. Your job now is to access those coordinates, but of course, it is stuck at the center of Giant Steep. What's interesting to me about what these Nomai are deciding to do with this whole thing, with this whole time travel thing and shooting off the probe, is they are doing what I think all materially minded people hope to do, which is to escape the fact of the deterministic layer of existence that we all have to exist within. The fact of the matter is, we did not decide our past. We did not decide who birthed us. We did not decide the time of our birth. We did not decide the genes that are contained in our blood. We did not decide the school that we were in, or the environment we grew up in, or the nutrition we had access to. If you continue that thought and you continue going, every single node along the decision tree of your own life becomes so tethered to things that came before. It becomes very limiting in the sense of what choice can be. It starts to feel as if choice is non-existent. What is fascinating to me about the experience of playing this game, and what I think the Nomai had finally stumbled onto, but of course it required death to access, is they had finally stumbled onto a way to actually have a choice for the first time. It's a choice that comes in a distant view of time and space. By distant, I mean it comes only with the information gained from the future being placed in reverse so that you finally have enough information to be able to actually make a choice. It toys with ideas about determinism versus free will, like where is the room for something like that? It gave me a chance to just sit and see the ways that there is a fundamental difference between the future and the past in a way that is very hard to appreciate. If we know that entropy increases ongoing, we know this physically. We know that over time, things will become less organized and decay and split apart. The future is truly open and messy, and the past is something set. It's the fact of the past being set that makes us, because we are thinking in terms of our memories, makes us think we are always in control when we actually aren't. Because the only thing we have information about is the thing where we get the big picture of the fullness of past, and we see that whole locked in space, that little image of everything that's already happened. And having the image of something makes you feel like an outside observer with control. But of course, the only thing we have the image for is the thing where we have no chance to change. That illusion of control emerges out of the illusion of awareness of the past, the idea that the past itself seems like a solid frame that is locked in place. It makes you feel like, oh, I can just pick that part out and I can change that. That's where that notion of could have done otherwise comes out of. that illusion of the thing being stiff and in control. But of course, the future is nothing like the past in that way. In Outer Wilds, you actually get to have that picture frame of your full past, and literally every time you die, it's literally a cascade of images flashing back, showing you everything that you did, showing you the movie of what you did, which is again so much of what memory feels like. It's like this weird movie of all of the things that you could have done. I'm thinking about this particularly. I was thinking about it a lot recently because my cat of 13 years passed away, and the thoughts that I was dealing with in response to her having passed away, the feeling of sorrow and just regret, thinking about, oh, I could have done this and this and this, like, oh, what sort of choices could I have made to make her feel better, to make the situation not be the way that it is? How could I have made her final days feel more reassuring than they ended up being? And it's the sense of, oh, I could have just gone back and done otherwise. The past, your memory of that past really feels solid because you can see it. I can see everything that happened, I can see every choice, and it gives me the feeling as if I could have done something different. And I think so much of our grief about things is a kind of illusion about how much choice we actually had. Because the fact of the matter is, I made the choices I made because the information I had access to, limited as it was, made it so that that choice that I made was either the most reasonable, the most emotionally salient, or by luck of the draw, the one that arose quickest to mind. And none of those I had control over. And it's the illusion of having had control over it that gives me that sensation of sorrow over having not done enough. The Nomai here in this game, they're trying to have that perfect thing that we all want, which is to be able to actually make a choice and have it fulfill itself. To actually do the best version of the thing. And their best version is we want to actually reach this place and reach this final destination, this final point, and we know that no one can do it in one lifetime, and we finally discovered the way to actually be able to make a real choice. And it's so sad because they had the same illusion we do because they really thought that they were going to be able to do it, and then of course the choice was taken away from them. It's completely lost. The sun didn't blow up the way they wanted, they didn't have the energy that they expected, and they continued trying to discover, and eventually they discover a horror that kills them finally. And then you are this, again, without really much control, by sheer happenstance, you become the one who actually makes the choice. And of course, ironically, it's not even really a choice for you either. You're just following the steps that they set up for you. You know that you're going to die at the end of the 22 minutes. The only thing that you can do to still be a you, and really the only thing that you can do at all, because the loop is just going to go on forever, to escape the hell of the determinacy of the loop, you are forced to make the only actual choice in the entire universe, and again, it's deterministic.
They should have had it made. They should have been able to be the be-all, end-all. They should have been the masters of time and space. If they had just been able to do things the way they foresaw, they could have been that causeless cause that has free will. They could have learned from a future that doesn't exist because they had reversed it. And they would have been able to do anything that they wanted, but they weren't quite able to get that machine in motion. Instead, they ended up being about as remarkable as anybody else. They had an amazing history, they had dreams, and then they were killed off by surprise. They weren't able to realize that dream. They were almost able to realize it for somebody else, but even that was a really imperfect form of it.
They seemingly had all the information they needed to become a kind of god of their own space, right? They were about to be able to just do what they wanted to do. No matter how hard you try, even with complete information, you can't escape the fact of the matter. The entire journey that they went on of that level of discovery, of actually solving that problem, was in hopes of the enlightenment that the eye would bring. But what's interesting is that they didn't actually have to reach the eye to get that enlightenment. It came from the pursuit of discovery. All of the particles that exist that make up your cells and makes up your body and makes up all the interactions that we have, all of the technology that we create is information. The DNA in your system is information that has been carried on forward through time. the medicine that you sip is information that is then utilized to mix molecules together to make the thing that heals you. If something can be done, it is merely a lack of information that stops it from being done. Then our job is to just perpetually seek that. This game is, in some weird way, and I think an accidental way, a kind of argument of the limitation of where that can take you. Because I think the Nomai actually had the information that they needed, they had everything, but they can't actually control the full past. If they had known what we know, they would have stopped seeking information in one case. And that one case is this weird comet with this elliptical orbit flying through the center of the star system. At the time that you're playing, it's called the Interloper. It's this icy comet just sort of swinging back and forth. Throughout the whole game, there's these little spots where you'll see this weird, smoky substance that as soon as you touch it, you just die, and you don't quite know what it is. But when you get to the Interloper, you enter this weird intruder in this star system, and you go deeper and deeper into it, and you can read some of the messages that the Nomai were sending to each other. And again, they were just trying to discover information. They were doing the thing that they were always doing. They were doing the thing that seemingly is the most rational thing to do, because of course information is good. They ended up stumbling onto something that they couldn't control. Again, we are actually more limited than we like to believe, even though it feels so good to think that we could know enough to escape that limit. And what they found is there's something in that asteroid that spreads like a kind of virus. We don't have the information of its origin, and it seemingly has no agency or mind attached. It is merely a kind of pandemic that blows outward and takes out the entire star system. It just spreads. And so these Nomai discover it, and in so doing, they actually release it, and it kills all of them. And so that question of, well, why is this civilization dead now? Why are the Nomai all gone? Why is everything in ruins? If they were so advanced, if they had all this information, if they were this close to getting the eye, if everything that I'm able to do is because of them, why are they gone? And it's sheer bad luck. It's that cruelty of civilization, bad luck. And it's something that could happen to us. You know, maybe it is. Maybe all of the things we're accumulating now will be worthless for the sake of luck. And the Nomai, they're gone now because they just discovered too much. And then you stumble in and you are relatively an idiot in comparison to them, to what the Nomai knew. You're really just picking up the ground that they laid for you. You're not really setting it up yourself. You're just stringing together what they already did. You, the bumbling idiot, actually get to fulfill the dream. Isn't that just a sad irony? To me, that's a great story. I like that idea of the story, of like the bumbling idiot makes his way because the universe is uncaring. There's something very distant and real about that. And it's the kind of story that is fulfilling in a way that is uncomfortable, I think, for certain types of story seekers. Like if you seek the story that is the pure hero's journey that we brought up before, right? The character comes back, they know something new, they learn, and they're completely shifted. This is that dark turn where the hero, what they learn about themselves is the absence of their heroic nature, the absence of their actual value. They are as much a pinball bouncing around as anything else. They are as much a particle just flinging into the next step as anything else, and we don't get to stop it.
What most stories are about is teaching an otherwise worthwhile lesson, which is that growth is good and realizing your potential is good, because it can be the difference between life and death. The discomfort that is built into this story comes from the realization that not only are the bad things down to pure chance, some of the worst things can be pure bad luck. Also, some of the best things can be pure bad luck. The fact that your species exists at all is a total fluke, just like the extinction of the Nomai. Because your species, as the Nomai explain in some of their writings, they met the early ancestors of your species. They found them in basically a little tadpole form. They were still aquatic creatures. And those creatures weren't killed by the Interloper. And the only reason they weren't killed by the Interloper is because they were aquatic. The ghost matter that kills everything instantly doesn't have an effect on water. And you can actually see this on Giant's Deep. Giant's Deep has a tendency to make the water level rise significantly higher during the extra swells of the waves. And there are ghost matter caves on Giant's Deep that you can walk directly through if the water has risen high enough. The game doesn't call attention to it, but they built in this little explanation, this mechanical explanation that explains that your entire existence is down to this pure chance. In the same way that their extinction was bad luck, your existence is good luck. None of it was in your control.
After you go to this orbital probe station, you learn about their goal. After you visit the Statue Island, you learn about how the information transfer is occurring. After you've accumulated enough information to discern the overarching story, this tragic tale of the Nomai, that brings us to the true final location in the game, which is Dark Bramble, the real horror at the center of Outer Wilds.
When you discover the remains of the crew that was left to fend for themselves in this strange floating fog, they show you that Dark Bramble is probably the most hostile place in this planetary system. It's sort of the final test of your curiosity in a way. It feels as if the game leading up to that point is trying to help you grow in your nerves, less afraid of the unknown and more curious about discovery.
It is an actual space of loss. The whole time you're in there, it is a mapless, unmappable space because it doesn't follow the rules of space that our intuition requires us to understand. Every bulb that you enter into expands into an entirely new space. Dark Bramble itself is almost like an illusion, where it feels like as soon as you enter into Dark Bramble, you're then entering into it again and again from different directions. Everything inside of it is itself again. So you as a player have to be extremely comfortable with your own knowledge and ability to navigate. And that's what you've been training yourself throughout every experience in this whole planetary system. You've been going to more and more dangerous places. You've been going deep, deep underwater. You've been hovering above a black hole. You've been traversing a time-limited space of sand-filling caverns. And so by the time you're in Dark Bramble, you have to actually traverse a space that isn't even really a space that you know. It actually becomes the most uncomfortable thing. So Dark Bramble is the end and the beginning of the journey at once. In one sense, it's a required end of the journey for you, the hero, in this game. And in another sense, it is the beginning for the journey of the Nomai, which you know ends in tragedy. You discover, by venturing deep enough and overcoming your own fear of this disorienting space, that the vessel that the Nomai had taken to reach the Eye was one vessel among many. This vessel left their home, the planetary system that the other Nomai were at, and it did not tell them that it was leaving in this direction. It thought that it was going to reach the Eye. It went AWOL in essence, and ended up in so doing becoming trapped in this weird organic horror space. The Nomai that we're witnessing in this whole planetary system, the Nomai that we've begun to know and become enveloped in their relationships and their story, it's really one evolutionary branch of a whole nother race of Nomai that continue to exist. The species of Nomai is not actually dead. The thing to wonder is, well, what continuously is existing out there in the vast rest of the universe? Where are the other Nomai? There's so much tragedy implied in the kind of stories that we've been learning about the civilization and how it's decayed. There's a kind of relief, even just barely, in the idea that what we've been witnessing is the flourishing of a single branch. The ways in which one tiny starting point can lead to a whole civilization of Nomai that becomes completely overwhelming to us with their abilities and their thoughtfulness and their art and their stories. And yet it's really just one seed that grew. It suggests a whole unfathomable amount of more Nomai out there populating the rest of the universe. But it also suggests something about the Nomai that actually got here, which is they seem to have a willing detachment from their home. This vessel that decided to leave and they decided not to tell the other Nomai that they were leaving or where they were going, they were willingly abandoning what to most would be the only thing that matters, which is where you come from, your whole history, your whole attachment to your species. And they just completely jumped ship and said, no, we care about this thing, the Eye, which to some may be religious devotion, to others may be scientific curiosity. It seems that the original vessel explorers were compelled by knowledge, by wanting to know more about things. And so we get this small group of explorers that was trying to detach themselves. It kind of reminds me of the Buddhist view of love and attachment. The idea that you can love something a great deal without necessarily being attached to it. And the Nomai seemingly love their history and the accumulated knowledge that they have and the pursuit of knowledge that they've developed into a keen habit. But they're not attached to the remnants of that. They're not attached to needing to stay with what is already there. They're not attached to tradition for its own sake. This weird branch of Nomai that left on this vessel to explore, they're not sanctifying their own ruins the way we are. Like when we see their ruins, we're seeing something like, oh my gosh, how depressing that they're all dying. But like these Nomai were willing to leave the entire past culture that they knew in order to venture forward. It's like they weren't past directed in the same way that we had to be as players of this game. It's just kind of nice learning that about them when we finally get access to this vessel. And then thinking that we can be forward directed too by finishing the job that they couldn't by sheer bad luck.
Sometimes diverting from a tradition is the only way to preserve it. We don't know anything about the state of those other Nomai. They're so far away, they have no way of communicating. For all we know, a freak accident has led to their extinction as well. For all we know, they did not last as long as the Nomai we view the ruins of. So part of the preciousness of agency and giving people the ability to make their own choices and divert things slightly or even greatly from the norm is that it allows people to be reserves for unforeseen tragedies. They can be equipped to deal with problems that we could not have predicted. They could build strengths that do not seem like strengths in our current time. On the topic of extinction, it's sort of like how the dinosaurs are known as these like incredibly powerful apex predators in some cases. And they were killed by an asteroid, and the only survivors on Earth were the small creatures that lived underground and underwater, much like the surviving timber Hearthians who survived underwater. It just shows that sometimes focusing on becoming as strong as possible can limit you, can make it so that there's no one left. There's only one way to be, and then that one way of being can be destroyed in an instant. And then there's no reserve left if you don't allow for the full tapestry of what people can do. Being a deviation can be seen as a negative thing, but it can be the only thing that saves you in the worst of circumstances.
In some way, it points to the value of difference generally. When we're a part of a society, as soon as we've segmented ourselves within that unit, it then becomes a temptation to flatten every individual within that unit in support of society. The deviations can be squashed for the greater good of what is best for the society. There's this view of policy, and I'm not endorsing it per se, it's just I think it happens to be a particularly interesting view. It was this philosopher of science, Karl Popper. He had this dynamic between what he called an open society and a closed society. He had the view that very often the utopian vision is a kind of perfectly egalitarian, perfectly directed moral society. But in order for that to exist, it has to be necessarily closed, because an open society would require the very deviation that would destroy that goal-oriented society that you would want. Any utopia has to be a deadening off of all of the possibilities that can come from difference. It's a deadening of difference. He argues that it's that temptation to yearn for utopia that makes us not value what is good about an open society, about the fact that you can have a society where someone thinks completely different from you. And as much as it makes you really angry, and as much as you can have righteous indignation over their exact thoughts, precisely because it's not in line with the utopia that you have in mind. From his point of view, that is a particularly profound greatness of a society when you can have that difference. And it's when that difference goes away, also that discomfort goes away, that the comfort becomes a blinding absence of difference. These Nomai represent a small piece of whatever complex society they came from that decided to fully separate themselves. And we get to see the extraordinary flourishing that comes out of that. We talked about this earlier in the video, how there was even differences among them, right? We got to see a little taste that some of them became very religious, some of them were much more scientifically oriented. Within that distance comes a culmination of significant truth. It's nice to know that the Nomai themselves that we're witnessing are also another deviation. And it's nice to wonder what the other branches of the deviation we never get to see end up being capable of doing. it also just reflects the general value of difference, or at least one notch in the direction of the ways in which Karl Popper's argument can be persuasive in terms of the value of an open society, so long as you're willing to sacrifice your idealism to a certain extent.
We don't mean to imply that people are unaware that agency is important, right? Like everybody seems to understand that on some level, right? It's important to remind ourselves that there is a particular value to agencies that is not based in the comfort that it provides, not based in the fact that being free obviously feels better than being trapped. That can seem like the main value of agency, but the empowerment is secondary to the variety that can only come with the freedom to make choices that are not coherent to the current norm.
It's incoherent within the confines of a particular logic. So if you have a society that has a goal in mind of being X, and then it becomes very useful to use the tool of rationality in order to achieve that goal X. But the logic doesn't set the goal for you. It is the passion that sets the goal. One of the values of allowing for a fully open system, or allowing for difference and cherishing that difference for its own sake, even though the individual case of difference might be extremely frustrating, is the fact that it is a difference of passion that you're noting. And it's the difference of passions that leads to a range of goals. If everyone had the same shared passion, logic by itself would not allow you to notice what you're missing, because logic is not directed. That's that whole point that the philosopher David Hume makes about reason being a slave to the passion. His point is not that we don't reason at all. In fact, he says we reason all the time. We are a very reasonable species. We use reason in a variety of ways. It's just the point is that reason by itself is very neutral. The facts in and of themselves don't point in directions. If you're open to the idea that your current understanding of things as they are could be missing something, then it is important to allow irrationality on the margins to potentially point you in directions you wouldn't have logically reached in order to have a potential outcome you didn't expect. And the logic will still apply within that outcome. It's a necessary moment of being humble in what you actually have access to and what you actually know. And that's where the deviations really become valuable. We get to see a little bit of that through these nomai and what they decided to do. The final sequence of Outer Wilds is really unlike anything else in the rest of the game. Up until that point, you, the player, are fully orchestrating the series of steps that you're following on the basis of what makes you most curious. You see planets in the sky and things exploding, and you read up on information from all of these ancient ancestors. You're picking up on little kernels of points of discovery, and then you're following those kernels on the basis of your own whim. And there's a lot of freedom there. It's a completely open-ended experience, and so much of what I feel is the genius of Outer Wilds, and so much of why you and I even bother to sit down and actually talk about this thing at length, is because it really is a game about changing the player's thinking, evolving their mind over a long span of learned time, and allowing them to be the wild variable at the center of this otherwise highly systematic world. There isn't randomness baked in to the core of that world, other than you. And so as you're going through this literal loop of pure scripted, pure deterministic world building and living, you are this little aleatory element that can veer off and be different. And so much of the journey is you fully deciding how even the game progresses. Perhaps many of you went to Giant's Deep first, or went straight to Brittle Hollow. Perhaps you were most intrigued by the Sun Station orbiting around the star at the center of this planetary system. The only thing that is cemented in place prior is the information that you are set to discover. And the order of that information is entirely up to you. That to me is so much of the genius at the core of this design. This game found a way to deliver pockets of information segmented across all of the planets in such a way that you can visit each of the places in any order, and you will get enough information out of each of the places that you visit that you then can construct mentally how they lock together in your own kind of puzzle diorama. So there are separate tiers of information that become immensely valuable. And by the time you reach this final sequence, and it really is a sequence, what you're doing is you're learning these separate subjects the subject of what is this orbital probe cannon? This orbital probe cannon that shoots out probes into the night sky, searching at random for that location of the eye. You have the information about the Ash Twin project itself, about how these Nomai began to experiment with time travel and even began to risk the entirety of the planetary system that they call home in pursuit of this 22-minute cyclical loop that you're now trapped in. You learn about the vessel, the home that the Nomai had left, the vessel that they used to leave it, the ways in which they arrived here in the planetary system, and the ways in which they are now able to go forward toward the eye once you find the coordinates. Those are the three main pieces of information: the orbital probe cannon, the Ash Twin project, and the vessel. Once you have those separate tiers of information, which again are distributed almost evenly throughout the rest of the planets, you then are putting it together so that you can formulate a perfect test of your ability. And that test comes in that final sequence where it's like, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to reach the vessel that is trapped at the center of Dark Bramble. I need to use the code that I find at the center of Giant's Deep in order to know the exact coordinates to reach the Sacred Eye. I need to teleport my way deep into the center of Ash Twin Planet in order to access the warp drive that is currently fueling this time loop. I need to pull that warp drive out, end the time loop, enter into the Dark Bramble vessel, and use those coordinates to shoot myself out into the eye. Once I do that full sequence, that is the only way to go forward. The final end of this game to me felt so much like a speedrun. I had the instructions not set out for me. The instructions were entirely inferred. All this information I have are like axiomatic statements of what is definitely true, and then I'm using these axioms to infer possible outcomes from that. I know how each piece functions, and now it's up to me to piece them together myself. It was actually the moment of the game where it felt the most like a straightforward puzzle. It felt the most like what I typically associate with puzzle games, where it's like you need to follow a set bit of instructions. In most puzzle games, the whole game is set instructions that you just need to pull off and complete in the proper way. At the very end of Outer Wilds, they actually have something like that, but it's earned completely by you because you're just piecing together what is otherwise disparate information, or seemingly could seem disparate, and you're somehow piecing it together into that final run.
Prior to that, the game doesn't test your knowledge so much as provide you with a sequence of sometimes redundant ways of learning the same thing. It's such a multi-layered system of informative experiences that you can have. The multi-layered information can make it feel like your way of playing Outer Wilds could have been the only way. It always feels like it all fits together perfectly for your experience. Of course, everybody experiences it differently. The brilliance of it is that it feels like a miracle, even though everyone is experiencing that same planned out miracle. After the game has set itself up and put itself in alignment for you, you are the one who finally has to put things in alignment. It finally is giving you one real test of your knowledge to ensure that you didn't just experience all of that, but that you actually understood how it relates in concert. It's the first and final test in a way, that brief and very exciting and climactic sense of control and mastery.
There was a minute or two where I had all that information and I had to just think for a second about it. There's nothing left for me to know, so what am I supposed to do with this? The hardest step in that process, I don't know if it was the same for you, was actually figuring out how to use the warp drive at the center of Ash Twin. There's this thing that you learn very early in the game. You learn about these teleporters that are on the Ash Twin planet. As the ash is removed from the planet, these black hole platforms start to become available. And if you stand on those platforms while the planet rotates, and as the platform is aiming at the destination of the white hole that it's linked to, you can then teleport yourself to that location. And there's one point where you need to line it up perfectly so that you can get to the center of Ash Twin. That was to me such a clever trick, because as you're lining it up, the ash tornado that sucks you up into the sky was rotating around the equator of the Ash Twin planet. And at the exact moment that the black hole aligns with its central white hole core, that tornado was right there and would have sucked you up. And so you had to think, how do I take advantage of whatever limited equipment that I have to actually make my way in? And that whole trick was to use your scout and to throw it out ahead of time onto the little black hole platform. and then let the scout be teleported away first so that you can know the exact moment that the teleportation will take you away so that you don't get sucked into the tornado. And then even once you figure that out, it's like an influx of information. Once you get inside of that whole place, you start to really learn how the time travel machine works. You start to understand that they're causing this loop to happen again and again so that they can gather information so that they can then find the eye and then transfer themselves out to the eye. Of course, you know that they die by the time you're there. You just enter into this Ash Twin center and you know that all of the power that's required is right there at the center of that planet. But of course, the greatest sacrifice of all needs to happen in order for you to access that power, and that is to end the loop.
The first thing that happens almost immediately once you've grabbed the warp core and pulled out your one lifeline and begun the biggest gamble of the game is you immediately hear a song that sounds very familiar. You hear a song that usually tolls only when the sun is about to explode in about a minute. It has the exact effect that it's supposed to have. It makes you suddenly panic a little bit and realize that whatever I have to do, I might have to do immediately. But it also thematically fits. It doesn't just have this perfect psychological effect. It also fits because it is spelling out that something is about to be destroyed and that you have to rush to the center as fast as you can before that happens. It's tense. It's a tense experience, and I can certainly imagine that a lot of people would their nerves would get the best of them and they would have to do it over and over.
Yeah, they make it hard enough that you're almost guaranteed to die at least once. Let's not exaggerate how hard it is, but it is definitely harder than a lot of the other sections of the game. The music that you bring up, the music at the end is so fitting for the whole tension of that experience. Because there's something about music at the end of these grand puzzle games that really adds to the instinctive memory that you build up for how to solve these sorts of things. This is going to be a major spoiler for The Witness, so skip if you need to. But the very end of The Witness tests your abilities in this confined space where music is picking up the pace. And as it picks up the pace, so too do you have to master and elevate your skills to keep up with that pace. You're really becoming in tune, almost like you're getting into the zone, like an athlete getting into the zone, trying to make sure that you execute this thing that you've been practicing all these hours. And Outer Wilds in that final sequence has the music play over what you're doing, and in the same way that music is a flow, you get into a kind of flow state. And it just becomes about executing this final battle. The battle is with yourself, with your own memory and with your own ability to just execute self-imposed instructions in order to actually accomplish what needs to be done. And again, the big major test is, can you piece together the pieces that we gave you? Can you see the ways in which they fit properly? And then just use them. Use them in the best way that you can.
After you grab the advanced warp core, there are 3 possible endings you can trigger at that point. One is to die. The second one, most people didn't do, is you can choose not to grab the advanced warp core and just wait inside Ash Twin until the loop begins to restart, and a black hole will open in the middle of Ash Twin, and you can go through it. And then in the next loop, you can return to Ash Twin and see yourself standing there and have a conversation. You can talk about the nature of self. You can talk about concerns about what it would mean to not return to the black hole each loop subsequently, because if you don't, then you'll create a paradox where your second self is there for no reason. And you can also scream a lot. There are many dialogue options that are just screaming at yourself back and forth. But the ending that we really want to discuss is the third one. You have to grab the warp core, venture out into Dark Bramble, go to the center, find the vessel, place the warp core inside, enter the coordinates, and finally come face to face with the eye. The eye is outside of the window. You can teleport yourself onto it. You are surrounded on the surface by storms and blinking objects that are appearing and disappearing with the flashes of lightning. And all of this resembles the behavior of the quantum moon and the quantum shards that you have encountered throughout the solar system. There is a connection between the quantum moon and the eye. The quantum moon seems to be the moon of the eye. Its behaviors are mimicked from the eye. The behaviors are caused by its proximity to the eye. The quantum moon, in a way, is a small taste of what the eye can do.
when you follow that pilgrimage that you learn about entering deeper into the quantum moon so that you can stare at the eye, the whole process of following that pilgrimage requires you to understand that the quantum moon, because it is constantly reappearing in orbit around different celestial bodies, that moon takes on the properties of whatever body it's around. So once you understand that, and you understand the steps to get it to appear with you on it around the eye, you start to learn that because the quantum moon is the moon of the eye, the fact that it's quantum reveals a great deal about the eye itself. All of the quantum material that you've been finding throughout your journey has been you touching, or at least in phase with or in interaction with, the eye itself in microcosm. You can infer that the experience on the eye must be fundamentally quantum in nature in order to match what we learned about it from having gone to the end of the quantum moon pilgrimage. So this final sequence is you entering into a realm that should not follow the rules of normal space and normal time. We've had traces of that. The whole loop is a break of time. The use of the various quantum rocks strewn throughout different planets, that was a trace of the weird observer effect of either seeing the thing or not, and then it appears or reappears. Dark Bramble itself seems to be that twist on space and how space actually functions. And when you get to the eye, that is the full culmination of that. And it leads to a highly trippy experience that is, upon first experiencing, at least for me, quite confusing. In some ways it's poetic, but just like poetry, it could be so convoluted as to feel like a bad trick. Like, oh, are you just throwing information meaninglessly at me and making me do the work of piecing it together? But it is also a full culmination of everything that you've gone through. And that is when you begin to wander through your final space of discovery, through this dark, dark forest at the center of the eye.
It is impossible to predict almost everything that happens inside the eye. You sink into the fog and you emerge not into another abstract painting, but into one of the most familiar and comforting places. You emerge in the museum that started it all, the museum in which you first encountered the Know My Mask. But it looks dilapidated now. It looks dark. It looks like a copy. It looks like it's not quite the museum that you remember. You go up the ramp, and that's when you go deeper into the eye. At that point, I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but as you keep going, the mechanics of the quantum moon and the quantum eye keep repeating themselves, keep encountering familiar things that are existing in relation to what you're observing. You encounter your friend only when you blink and look away, and then your friend tells you to look for the others, and so you find their instruments that you associate them with, and then they appear again when you've reminded yourself of your connection to them. Because your connection was always through music. Your connection was always through aiming your signal scope off into the distance and hearing that they're okay because they're playing their song. It all seems to be a sequence of reminding yourself of how you connect to the people who you're trying to unite in the center of this forest.
You're bringing together an ensemble in order to create a song. This is the part of the interpretation of the ending that is more poetic. Because I think just like much truly great science fiction, which Outer Wilds definitely is, Outer Wilds is great science fiction. It has a strong core of humanity and beauty, and the science is a means of communicating something very human. So the initial feeling of that ending is you gathering up memories, gathering up explorers, and seeing artifacts of your own history re-emerging in these spaces. The music that they play is, like all music, bound in the context of you having known them in your own lifetime. I was wondering about this metaphor that's being played with at that ending, because there is a more literal interpretation and we will get into that, but I was wondering why music is so vital to exploration generally in this game. Every time you look out, you see these explorers and they're all playing a single song, but they're all playing separate parts of that one same song. This final sequence is your chance to bring all those parts together so that they line up just right and make that one final, fully orchestrated piece. And music has that special quality of being fully bound by context. No single note makes a song. The song is the fullness of the experience. It's the anticipation that gets built up as you listen to the song. It is the break in pattern that occurs to elevate emotion. It is the return to the echo of what you had appreciated prior in the song. And it is that play with the fullness of the gestalt that makes music music. And in that final moment, you are gathering together the melody, and it is like the melody of the planets themselves in this system. They are all integrated with each other. No one piece can exist outside of all the other pieces. Every planet that's orbiting around the sun is itself a gravitational core that is affecting all the other planets. They are all in it together. Just like the music isn't truly music until it has integrated itself with its full context of where it's going and where it comes from. Music is like this odd trace of time where we really get a sense where any one present moment means nothing without the future that's planned and without the past that already came. That full, wrapped around cyclical design of appreciating the whole, not the part. So much of puzzle design or so much of our sense of using things is in part. We have that left hemisphere part of ourselves that wants to manipulate, that wants to segment, to label, to separate things. In this final moment, it really takes you to a mental state of coalescing above all else. The poetry of that sequence of just finding each of these characters, these explorers, and thinking of them in terms of relying on each other, of not really fully existing without each other. Everything is just coming together. This reminder that segmenting things into parts is not actually segmenting them because the reality of them is always in relation to something else. And music, to me, has always been the medium at which context becomes so paramount. That's why I love music so much. It's nice that this game pulls back on that, because to me, that sequence feels paradigmatic of the whole thing, in the sense of the whole game is about taking disparate elements and bringing them together, and recognizing the ways in which all those elements were never disparate to begin with, that everything was integrated. That's the nature of the loop. Everything is already what it is. So then, of course, the poetic angle of things, that's just one very artistic way to grasp it, right? To manage it. There is also the science part of this science fiction. What you're doing the whole time is you're bringing together all of these explorers and you're bringing them around this final campfire at the center of the eye, and they're playing this grand, great song, and then it's causing this orb to appear in the very center above the campfire, and you're supposed to jump into it. The most confusing thing about that initial experience of the ending is that you jump in and it just expands outward and then the credits begin. There's no explanation around that. The sense that I got was this whole game had been setting in place this opportunity for you, the player, to be free in one real sense. In the loop existing and in your knowledge that you're gaining from that loop, you actually find a means of freedom in a way that no one else gets to have. But what's funny about actually making your way through that final sequence and jumping into that orb is it seems like you end up starting the whole thing all over again. You're actually birthing either the universe or sending out the initial signal of the eye that is the thing that starts the whole process that is the game. All the freedom that you seemingly just got is actually really just fully determined in exactly the same way as everything else is. Freedom is actually truly lost in that case. The song that calls all of these explorers from across all of these different systems is the song that you make occur at the very end of the game by bringing all of the explorers around that campfire, and they're playing that song, and that maybe is the signal that the eye is sending out. That starts the whole process of everyone wanting to come to this place. And it's of course them coming to that place that leads to you being able to start the signal that then causes them to come to that place. And it is a perfect loop all over again, but it's just now a loop in a broader expanse of time. That's one interpretation.
One of the joys of taking part in this channel is that I get to talk to my brother about video games in a way that I can talk to no one else about them. It's in moments like this that we get to really say something not just about a game, but about ourselves, because that's always what happens when you interpret a story. It's always going to come from inside of you in some way. We don't see ourselves as objective critics or people who are reviewing games, trying to tell you whether they are worth buying or not. We really are just here to do the service of setting an example for how to have an honest and subjective experience with art. Games as a medium specifically are in need of more mainstream sources of that kind of interpretation. All that is just to say that I definitely feel that most people, myself included, we look at that ending and it's left open-ended enough that our interpretations are all going to be a bit different. I've never heard anyone quite interpret the game's ending in the same way. So when I look at that, elements of my own way of looking at things come out. When I see that song playing and I see this new universe forming in the middle of that crowd, that whole moment is clarified by a little drawing that happens right after the credits. In the middle of this new universe that is formed with new planets that look like they're just barely forming out of dust, there's a little campfire with aliens surrounding it, and they look like insects. They look, in other words, different from any of the aliens that we've seen so far. It seems like the implication is that the universe has started again and it's not the same. That a new universe has been born with it. It has a completely different destiny than the previous one. This probably has happened many times. The pattern is continuing, but the pattern always changes. The only thing that seems to set the universe in motion to be reborn is a group of conscious beings entering the eye of the universe and assigning value to something. They are observing the eye with all of their biases, with all of their specific interests, with all of their memories, with all of their uniqueness and their identity and their personality. They're putting meaning into a new universe so that it can be something other than a repetition of the previous ones. It's a different seed for the universe that comes from an arbitrary place. One way of interpreting that is to say that these people are the masters of the universe, that they are controlling the birth of an entire existence. But my personal way of looking at it is that it's just a little way that the universe can preserve the idea that something matters. That there isn't just a bunch of stagnation in a big cloud where everything is already stable, where nothing actually does anything. In order for that to exist, it almost seems like it would require this preference. It would require this arbitrary personality of living beings. It was very moving when I reflected on it. After I dealt with the confusion, after I sat with it and I frankly didn't know exactly what I had just seen, I was moved by the realization that this is a game about creating something new in order to preserve what you think matters about what has already occurred, not just preserving everything equally.
Well, that's a perfectly excellent interpretation. That's completely different from mine. But I like that because it functionally fits. What seems important about that ending, as far as I can tell, is the quantum state of the eye and the moon associated with it was a series of parallel possibilities, all occurring at once. And because you are in a loop, you have access to all of those possibilities in front of you. And it makes the future mapped in a way that we don't get in actual life. We don't get to know all the possibilities of where we can go. One way to view the ending on top of the two interpretations that we just threw out is maybe the decision to jump through that final orb to actually commit yourself to this new universe is a decision to collapse the possibilities into an actual choice. And so in one sense, the beauty of consciousness, the beauty of this communal coherence that was developing over the long span of this journey that you're on is this final moment of collapsing away parallel universes and quantum entangled states and actually deciding on something. Actually bringing it together to make just one direction so that this thing can blossom anew all over again. Actually committing to a branch. Instead of being trapped by this otherwise tyranny of open doors and actually deciding to walk through one. And maybe that's what you do at the end is you actually walk through that final door and you shut all the others and you just commit to it. And maybe that births a whole new universe, or the horror, maybe it's really the start of the whole loop and you're actually truly trapped. It just depends on you. I like that this Outer Wilds game is actively ambiguous in a way that doesn't lend itself to a cynical view of half-hearted commitment. They certainly commit to something here, but they're leaving it ambiguous because that is necessarily where the work on your end lies. That is necessarily where you enter the picture. So much of Outer Wilds is them having placed the parameters that can be played with in front of you, setting those parameters very rigidly, and then allowing you to actually matter when you get brought into the journey. Every step of the way is you actually mattering in this otherwise highly rigid space. And the ending is the same thing. They give you something fairly restricted, but they decide at that final moment to have the ambiguity centered enough so that you get to again be the agent in that interpretation. You again get to continue that process. With video games, and this should apply to all media, I mean, I wonder about the future of literature and music and media when it really contends with the kind of world that we're living in now. We really are living in a world of active communication centering everything. And of course, at the current moment, it's mostly banal and superficial, at least seemingly. Again, this is all just on what we see, but the feeling is the online banter is a kind of babble that hasn't coalesced into something significant. But there is something significant at the core of the babble, and that is the fact of a range of interpretations and the blessing of communication. We have a video that we did on Elden Ring, and we talked about one of the great things about the design of Elden Ring is it seems to actively incorporate the fact that people will communicate with each other into the discovery that you're doing through that world. Because they remove enough instruction and information such that you're almost required to communicate in order to make your way through. You're required to look up information. You're required to ask questions with people. You're motivated to, in an outburst of excitement, say, hey, did you see this? This is what I just did. And that's such a great modern thing. And it's a little taste of that, of having your design actually built around people communicating with each other. Outer Wilds, although the experience of the game is so substantive and dense and heavy as to, by necessity, become shrouded in a kind of secrecy, once you enter into that world of secrets and contingent information building, stacking off one on top of the other, you enter into a community, this little shadow community of people who've experienced something and actually grown. At the beginning of this video, we talked about the hero's journey, how it becomes about you changing. So you, the player, are changing, and by the end of this, you get to meet other players who changed with you, and then you get this ending that is so open and yet so contingent on everything that you've been building up before that you get to talk about with each other. And that gestalt arises anew, that sense of wholeness comes back, and that is something special. In its final moments, it falls back on what it does so well, which is the non-linearity of its own meaning, the non-linearity of its own engagement. We get to have open-ended views on that ending. I'm intrigued by that idea that the universe is actually starting anew. But either way, it seems like something is collapsing there. The quantum entanglement actually gets fully observed really at that end, and it actually halts the constant never-ending cycle of parallels.
This game inspires so much discussion. It inspires people to stand up from their chair and reflect and seek out somebody else to reflect on the game with. People have this desperate urge to talk about the game with each other. And I think that idea is really at the center of the entire experience. Both the story and the gameplay illustrate the value of what you were talking about in that third interpretation. The way that we have to commit to things. Because throughout the game, you are taught by how things are set up that when you are surrounded by an endless and neutral, daunting tapestry of options, that you have to commit to something, that you have to choose. You can't go to all the planets at once. You have to create your own sequence. That choice is what the story is about in the end. It's about being able to say, yes, everything is amazing, everything is beautiful, but what is my part in it? How am I going to seek out what matters to me so that I can contribute to the larger discussion that will happen afterward?
And in that perfectly fitting way, the journey is still not over. If you're watching this video, if you've made it through this hours-long discussion, I actually don't know how long it's going to be, but if you've made it through this full discussion and you were eagerly anticipating different interpretations, if you were curious about the ways in which someone can see the same space, the same experience a little bit differently than you, that is because the game started a journey, it didn't end it. It began a process of curiosity, and just like our own search for truth in the real world, and just like the Nomai's search for their truth and their understanding, it doesn't actually end, it is a process. It is not an endpoint. It has various goals, but the goals are always shifting. And in that way, you're still on the journey right now, listening to this conversation. It brings to mind a science fiction story that I think is one of the best science fiction stories I've read. And it's the story of The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. And the story is actually very similar to the experience that you're going through here. It's a story about a central question of the entropy that continues to build over the span of a universe, the eventual destruction of things. Entropy is the breakdown of order. Things begin in an ordered state, and over time, that order of information deteriorates, begins to break down, begins to become disorder, more chaotic, more stochastic. There are these characters who invent an artificial intelligence that can answer anything, and they pose a question to this AI: how do we halt this increase in entropy? How do we stop the inevitable death of our universe? The AI can't give them an answer. It says that the data is insufficient. Millennia pass and the AI continues to advance, as AI ideally would do, grows on the basis of data and information. A whole new generation of beings asks the same question again: how do we halt the death of the universe? How do we halt this increase in entropy? And the AI says that the data is still insufficient. This continues again and again, generation after generation. It's trying to find enough information to be able to answer this question: how do we stop the death of civilization? How do we stop the death of consciousness, of mind? The whole experience of Outer Wilds, we are facing this consequence. We are seeing the death of the smartest beings that we know of in this planetary system. We're meeting these nomai, we're understanding them, and we're seeing them as creatures that reached the peak of information gathering and processing and inference, and they were working at something, and we know that they died, and there's a tragedy there, and we know that the sun is about to kill us too, and we know that just death is inevitable, and it's that central question: how do we stop this death? And in this story, they keep asking this AI, they ask it again and again, and it keeps trying to find data. At some point, the beings at the center of this story fuse with the AI. They all become one single consciousness. The energy of the universe molds together. They become this grand thing, this grand AI, and they're working together, and they're still trying to answer that final question: how do we actually stop the breakdown of the universe? And by the end of the story, the universe has almost fully, completely broken down. All of the energy that's left is being used up just for this artificial intelligence to continue to try to find the answer to how to stop the breakdown of the universe. And at the very end, it finds the answer, but there's no one to tell it to. And so it begins the whole universe again. It says, let there be light. It starts up the universe again so that it can give an answer to a conscious being. The significance of the story seems to run on the idea of there being a value in consciousness and in having someone to give an answer to. Having someone to have the curiosity matter to, as opposed to just something dead and off on the side. In Outer Wilds, we go through this whole journey, we do the whole thing. We are gathering together other explorers. We're playing this music, which is an ensemble effort. Music in the sense of a band, music in the sense of cooperating and improvising off of someone else's mind, of actually sharing in the information, sharing in the experience. And we finally get to finish this whole thing. And then now it's on us to continue the communication part of that journey and have someone to give an answer to. There's probably such a range of interpretations that you and I don't even know about. There is something powerful about the existence of something to understand itself. And you in Outer Wilds, you're just on that journey and you're doing that process of understanding.